to the Ready to Bid podcast, where we talk about real estate auctions and interesting topics. Today's a special edition of the Ready to Bid podcast. I've got my son Louis Swicegood with us, and we're talking about 250-year birthday of America. On July 4th, 2026, America celebrates its 250th birthday. For 2.5 centuries, generations of Americans have fought, sacrificed, built, and dreamed to preserve the greatest experiment in self-government the world has ever known. Louis, you have an affinity for history. Where'd that come from?
That, I would say, came from a combination of being a young kid who loved to read books. My grandfather was always into history. You were always into history. And just growing up, I just loved diving into nonfiction, and I just stuck with the historical books growing up.
How important is reading? What would you tell a parent today about reading and their children?
I would say reading is the most important thing you could teach a kid, especially with social media being such a huge factor in today's day and age. I think you can really teach a kid how to focus in on something by reading a book, because it's not something you can scroll. It's something you actually have to focus on and read.
Yeah, so let's start with American history.
Mm-hmm.
What name comes to mind when you think of American history?
So we are going to talk about Thomas Paine, but before we even get to there, I want to talk about like where America even started. So obviously everyone knows about the original 13 colonies. We came over from England, but where did this zeal of revolution come from? Well, it starts in at the tail end of the 7 Years' War. And England is in crippling debt, so they decide to raise taxes on the 13 colonies, which, of course, we were being taxed by a nation all the way across the Atlantic Ocean without proper representation in Parliament. So we start to get upset about that. We start protesting. We start having major events, the tea tax, the Stamp Act, the Boston Massacre takes place. Public anger arouses. You've got the Boston Tea Party, and suddenly what started off as simple protest, shots are then fired, and then the war kicks off. So the war begins. We decide to start off fighting the British. We don't really know what we're fighting for yet. Are we fighting for independence, or are we fighting to reconcile? The war continues. Washington's army is beaten multiple times and is on the run. And then we come to Thomas Paine.
Who is Thomas Paine? You know, I'm going to guess that most Americans have heard the name but don't know the story.
Thomas Paine started off, he was born in England. He like many Americans, crosses the English Channel and sets up a new life in America. He's broke. He is not a well-known person at the time. But then the war kicks off, and he begins by writing shortly after the creation of the nation. When we declare independence, he writes Common Sense. At the time, America, or the colonies, were not sure about independence. They didn't know if they wanted to reconcile. In fact, when the first shots were fired, Congress actually sent a plea to the king, asking for peace and basically asking to reconcile so that our requests could be heard.
So he wrote Common Sense. Is that a book?
It's a pamphlet that basically was advocating for independence. It was saying that this makes sense. This is what we are fighting for. Because like I said, there was still a lot of debate. Do we want to declare independence, or do we want to reconcile? So Common Sense is written, and that basically spurs the momentum that leads to the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
What's the great quote of that book?
Oh, goodness. There's so many. He wrote multiple pamphlets. I can't remember the quote for Common Sense, but I can remember the quote that kicks up later. He writes a couple pamphlets throughout the war. The one that I love to quote the most is, "These are the times that tries men's souls." When he's talking about the sunshine patriot, he's referring to, it's easy to fight for your country when times are good. Can you fight for your country when times are bad? He wrote that shortly after many of Washington's defeats. So Washington at the time had been, he was obviously the leader of the Continental Army. He had been beaten again and again and again. The father of our nation was, everyone talks about him as this great general. He was beaten more times than he won. But this pamphlet was written when the army was cold, it was hungry. It had been beaten all across the North. It had been driven away from New York. and the enlistments were about to expire. So Washington basically is holding together the army by his sheer will alone. This pamphlet is written, which spurs a sense of action, a sense of dedication, a renewal to this fight. So I would say that these words are what kind of kept the army together. It was the glue. But, we're about to move on to what then solidifies that glue, and that would be the famous crossing of the Delaware.
Pictures are painted.
Those pictures are very inaccurate. Washington was not standing triumphantly. Those boats are also inaccurate. The boats that were used were actually flat and were pushed across the water. I doubt there were huge icebergs like there are in the picture portraying the crossing. But to lead up to the crossing, once again, we have Washington's on the run. He and his army cross. This is before the crossing, the one you're thinking of. Cornwallis, another famous figure, is hot on his heels, chasing him. Washington barely escapes. The army's on the other side of the river. The British strategy at this point is to wait for the river to freeze, march over, defeat Washington. So Washington recognizes, like I said before, the enlistments are about to expire. He needs a shot in the arm, an adrenaline shot to get the boys to want to stay on and re-enlist. So he comes up with this plan that many would consider kind of bonkers. He's going to take his army. He's going to march them. Well, he's going to cross the river first. He's going to march them through the night and attack Trenton on Christmas Day. And it is, without a doubt, logistically, it was a tough assignment, but it was his greatest victory. It's a small victory on paper. It's a very small battle compared to what will come in the following wars, such as the Civil War. But it's that one battle that just reinvigorates the cause.
I noticed in your notes you said many soldiers marched barefooted.
In fact, there were very few casualties on the American side. I believe, and I might be misquoting, but I believe that the only casualty was someone who died of frostbite. The Americans truly did surprise, and we weren't attacking the British. We were actually attacking the Hessians. They were German mercenaries who fought for the British, but this attack was successful. We caught them off guard. We managed to capture munitions, clothes, cannons. It was a huge morale boost for the army.
Let's jump forward to Philadelphia, the Liberty Bell.
Oh,
you've seen that before.
I have seen it. Yes, it is. Contrary to belief, it did not crack on the Declaration signing when it was rung, but it is. It's quite the symbol of America itself. Philadelphia was the first capital of the United States. It actually changed hands many times during the war, twice. The British captured it early in the war. In fact, they captured it shortly after Trenton. But it was it's a symbol of just resilience, that even though the British captured our capital at the time, we were still able to keep fighting, keep going. Eventually, they were forced to withdraw, and we retook the capital. But it's a shining example of true democracy. These men from all over the colonies coming together in Philadelphia to create this Declaration of Independence about the rights of man.
Let's talk about men. Adams and Jefferson. What's unique about their death?
Well, Adams and Jefferson are two, obviously, they were signers of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson was president. They were really close friends throughout the war. They were, obviously, Jefferson's instrumental in the writing of the Declaration of Independence. Adams was one of the many men who basically edited it, as well as Franklin. But these men were close friends. But like politics does to many people, certainly then and certainly today, they had a falling out. They had a lot of political disagreements on the power of the federal government and what it meant to be. There's three branches of government, and which branch was more powerful than the other branch, the executive, so on and so forth. So these men have a falling out. Eventually, they do reconcile. Thanks in large part to John Adams's wife. They started corresponding again, and they reconciled their friendship. They died hours apart on July 4th, 1826. 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Adams' last words were reported as Thomas Jefferson survives, which is sadly ironic because he had passed away just hours prior. But they both passed away on that anniversary. It's
chilling.
It is chilling. It's an amazing thing. I highly recommend watching the HBO docudrama on Adams. It's a fascinating look at the character, who he was. It is two men, two flawed men, but these two men were instrumental in the creation of the nation.
Let's go to music. Star Spangled Banner.
Okay, Star Spangled Banner. We're jumping forward to 1812, the War of 1812. This war is fought over. It's hard to say what it's fought over, but many would argue it was fought over mercantile disputes. British were capturing U.S. ships and basically forcing their sailors to fight for the English. Europe at the time is in a absolute crisis. Napoleon is on the rampage, and then this war kicks off between United States and England. The English and the United States battle it out. The White House is famously burned. There is many famous battles, but then we get to the Star Spangled Banner, which takes place during the bombardment of Fort McHenry. If I remember correctly, Francis Scott Key was sent along with some other men to be like a negotiation kind of thing, but they were forced to stay on the ship so as to not alert the Americans of the attack. The bombardment takes place. There's many, shells are fired throughout the night. At dawn, the flag is still famously flying over the fort, and he writes the Star Spangled Banner, which then becomes just this beautiful song talking about the battle that takes place. Our flag was still there.
I can't help but think of Whitney Houston.
Yeah, she sings it perfect.
She really does.
It's one of the she encapsulates that song. Every time you go to a sporting event and you hear that song being played, it just, for me, it gives you chills every time, because it is a encapsulation of what it means to be an American. You're almost like an underdog spirit, but we come back and win.
We're talking about an underdog spirit. Let's go to one of your heroes.
Abraham Lincoln, a president, true, and there were other presidents like him as well, who came from quite literally nothing. He grew up in a log cabin. His father was was certainly not a rich man. He was as low as you could be on the system, like low, middle, high. He was on the low end. He became a lawyer. Eventually becomes a congressman, and then he becomes the leader of the Republican Party, which was a new party that had just come about. This party was as the GOP at the time, was quite different than it is today, but the fundamental core was that it was a abolitionist party. And then Lincoln becomes the front runner to be president of the United States, which at the time he becomes president, or he's running for president, the nation is about to rip itself apart. Slavery, which had been around since the very founding of the colonies, had been a thorn in the side ever since the Declaration signing. Jefferson described it as the snake underneath the table during basically the creation of the nation. And all the presidents prior to then had been compromise. Well, we'll do this thing where, one state will be free, one state will be slave, one state will be free, one state will be slave state, and then it all accumulates to Kansas, where the first shots are fired, not of the Civil War, but of the starting of this hostility, where, is it going to be a slave state? Is it going to be a free state? And then Lincoln becomes president, where on many cases he wasn't even on the ballot in some of the states in the South, but he did win the election, and now he's president, and the South starts to secede, one state after the next after the next. He is president of a country that's literally tearing itself apart, and this is before the first shots have even been fired at Fort Sumter.
When you go visit the Lincoln Memorial, what do you think?
Well, what can you think of except my favorite speech he wrote was his inaugural address, his second inaugural address. At this point, it is 1865. He nearly lost his second term. He nearly didn't succeed. He was in a running against one of his former generals, George McClellan, who was running on behalf of the Democrats, who at the time wanted to make peace with the South. The Union had been winning battles, but the casualties were so high that the North was beginning to feel fatigue from the war. Atlanta was taken by Sherman, and that was that boost that kind of gave the North, like, okay, the war is nearing its end. There is a sight to be seen. Like, we are seeing the end of the race. Lincoln's elected in January. He has this speech where he talks about finishing the work that we are in. With firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work that we are in, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and his widow and his orphan, to create a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. It's a beautiful speech. It kind of, one of the things he talks about in the speech is reconciliation, not revenge. It's he's not going to punish the South. He's basically saying, I want you to return. You're not a belligerent nation fighting against us. You are just these are separate states that are in rebellion. I want them to be back and part of the Union. It's a beautiful speech, because many presidents in his shoes would have been like, well, I'm going to win the war and there's going to be a lot of hangings. But Lincoln did not want that. He wanted reconciliation. I mean, famously, when Lee surrendered, Grant, who, everything that Grant did was in proxy to what Lincoln believed in. He gave out very generous terms to Lee's army, paroled their officers, allowed them to keep their sidearms and horses for, the plow that was coming up for the harvest. He didn't prosecute any of them. In fact, I think that Jefferson was really the only major prosecution, but he was acquitted per Lincoln's wishes. But it's a beautiful speech that talks about reconciliation. Lincoln famously said that it was a new birth of freedom, a new birth of freedom. America had had its baptism by fire. I mean, more Americans died in the Civil War than any war combined. I mean,
when you think of Lincoln, what's the one word that comes to your mind?
I would say indomitable spirit.
That's 2 words, but that's okay.
He was put in an impossible situation where a nation was tearing itself apart. He was a wordsmith. You can read his first inaugural address, and it's very different than his second. He doesn't even mention really slavery in his first. He just talks about preserving the Union. I want to preserve the Union. He did that mostly to keep the border states such as Kentucky from seceding to the Confederacy, and Maryland, for example. But as the war goes on, war changes things. The war may have begun about the preservation of the Union, but it changed into this abolitionist mindset of we're going to free the slaves. I mean, he famously lobbied hard in 1865 to get the passing of the 13th Amendment, which changed everything.
Doesn't that say something about the American experience?
It does.
It's an incredible slavery as a stain,
mm-hmm.
but our nation got past that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful story.
It is a beautiful story, and it's caveated by one of the great American tragedies when he was assassinated. I always wonder, because you have to remember his term had just begun. He had been inaugurated in January, and he was killed in April, shortly after the war ended. I mean, that for me is the greatest of the American tragedies, is that Lincoln was not able to live in times of peace as president. He was killed by an assassin's bullet at Ford's Theater. Johnson takes over, and he is a scallywag, to say the least, compared to Lincoln, who Lincoln's idea was Reconstruction, and Reconstruction did take place in the South. But I do believe that if he had lived through his full term, there would have been a quicker reconciliation. It would have been a lessening of the Jim Crow era that took place in the American South. And it truly is the great tragedy that Lincoln, who had gone through 4 years of just miserable war, if you look at the pictures of him from the beginning
aged
to the end, it looks like he's aged 20 years.
Well, let's jump 50 years or so. Actually, less than 50 years. Theodore Roosevelt.
One of my favorite presidents, probably number 2 on the list. The famous Rough Rider, an American pioneer. Speak softly, carry a big stick. There's many things to say about old Teddy Roosevelt. He obviously was famous for the Rough Riders. He was famous for his conservation efforts in the national park system. Every time I go to a national park, I think about Teddy Roosevelt. I think about Yellowstone. I think about the Smoky Mountain National Park. I think about the Tetons. I mean, there's something to be said about Teddy. He believed in conservation. As a hunter myself, a true hunter, someone who cares about the environment, who believes that I'm going to steward this for the next generation. Because when he was president, there was no limits on what you could do. I mean, you could shoot. They had punt guns for duck hunting, where you'd fire that sucker off and kill 100 birds in one shot. I mean, it was absolutely just limiting the future. He steps in, creates regulation. I'm not a big regulation guy, but even I believe that there are some regulations that need to be had. And his creation of the national park system, as well as wildlife regulations, really created the hunting environment that we have today.
Yeah, I'm fond of buffaloes. I've got paintings in my bedroom of Western buffalo scenes, and it makes me think of Teddy Roosevelt. Let's go to a special place we've visited before, and that's France.
Oh, Normandy. To lead up to Normandy, World War I takes place. The Americans join in towards the tail end of the war. Woodrow Wilson is president. They create the League of Nations. But America, between that time and the 1940s, we go through the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl. America is quite literally knocked on its back heel from an economic standpoint. There's Hoovervilles, tent cities. It's a terrible time to be an American. And then, of course, you got Roosevelt comes in, the New Deal. You can debate all you want to about his progressive policies, but he did invigorate the Americans. He was one of the first presidents to speak to the Americans over the radio. His famous fireside chats, which made him a very personable president.
He connected with them.
He did connect with them. That's why he was so popular. He's the only president to serve for 3 terms, and he was the last president to serve for 3 terms. Obviously Pearl Harbor takes place. America is plunged into World War II. Germany declares war on the United States. From 1941 to 1944, countless battles have been fought in the Pacific, as well as in North Africa, in Sicily, Italy, Patton famously in Sicily, and then you get to Normandy. Normandy is an accumulation of America, British, and Canadian and French forces. Eisenhower, a famous American, soon-to-be president, is in charge of this operation, and it's truly a testament to coordination with the Allies, as well as an iron will to be able to do this. I mean, there's a movie coming out recently about the weather and how everything had to be perfectly timed.
Pressure.
It's a great movie. I haven't seen it yet, but it sounds like a great movie to invade at this specific time. The American soldier, much maligned in previous years in World War I, II, is just, here at the last second to, save the day. But the American soldier had already acquitted himself in the Pacific and in North Africa and in Sicily. I think about men in the 82nd, 101st Airborne jumping in the dark of night, landing in unknown towns in France, soon to be famous towns in France, such as Saint-Mary-Glise, such as Caratan, and just, the men of Omaha Beach and Utah Beach, Point de Hoc. These men coming in under a hail of bullets and just pushing forward. So many famous stories take place. I mean, Roosevelt, for example, not this Roosevelt, but the other Roosevelt. I'm talking about his son was on Utah Beach.
Mm-hmm.
He was a general.
Died.
He did. He died of a heart attack, actually. But he he landed on the beach with a cane because he had arthritis. And he had a famous quote, and I think it echoes for all the men who fought at Normandy. We'll start the war from here, because they landed on the wrong beach. They were actually not in the correct area, but he was like, okay, we're here. Let's go. We're going to improvise. We're going to adapt. We're going to overcome. It is a testament to those boys who fought on those beaches. They truly were and are the greatest generation, and they epitomize what it means to be an American.
The portrait of America is painted with blood.
The Tree of Liberty is very much watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants, and it is constantly being watered to this day. I'm very thankful for the men and women who serve our country, and in all the wars, dating back to the creation of this country, to the unknown wars, the wars that people don't remember, Korea, or don't want to remember, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran today. These men and women served our country with honor and continue to serve our country with honor. And it's a beautiful thing to watch the transformation of the United States Army from the Continental era to the Civil War, when African Americans were allowed to serve in the Civil War, as well as the growing wars. And in a way, I think the Army was a huge component. The military was a huge component in beating, for example, the Jim Crow era. Because I love the R. Lee Ermey quote in the movie Full Metal Jacket. Here in the military, you are all equally worthless. but but it's kind of, it's a funny way to think about it. But it kind of shows you how, that can create these progressive movements in the American mindset. It's constantly changing. It's a flaw. It's not a perfect system. It's a flawed system, but it's our system.
Yeah. Well, let's begin to shut the door on this edition of Ready to Bid podcast, Lewis. And won't you end with some thoughts, and then I'm going to let you sign us out. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm a real estate broker and auctioneer with the Swicegood Group. I predominantly do, obviously, real estate and firearm sales. I loved the firearm aspect because I get to put my hands on a lot of historical weapons that come through our shop. I'm a husband, I'm a father to a sweet boy, Rylan, a loving wife, Kayla. She is, I knew she was the right one because on one of our early dates, she took me to the North Carolina History Museum and let me nerd out while I walked through all those different exhibits. But I love America. I love what this country stands for. It's not a perfect country, but it's our country. And the beautiful thing about America is that we have these fundamental ideas that all men are created equal under God, and that we have inalienable rights that are handed down by our Creator. And these rights are the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.